The manager makes a foolish assumption when a new car dealership owner enters without being detected. However, her entire world turns upside down in a way she never anticipated when the police become involved. Warm light from the late afternoon sun reflected off rows of shiny autos in the South Point Motors lot. There was a constant buzz of activity as patrons moved between cars, some looking inside and others having passionate discussions with salespeople. For the dealership, it was simply another hectic day. From a simple car parked at the edge of the lot, a tall, calm black man emerged. His outfit, which included polished leather shoes, dark pants, and a clean white button-down shirt, was simple yet purposeful. His eyes lingered on the building's contemporary front while he cast a cool but perceptive scan about. Taryn was the man's name. He wasn't merely come to look at cars today. The place belonged to him. Taryn had decided not to make any prior announcements about his presence. He wanted an unvarnished perspective of how things were conducted, a genuine sense of the dealership's culture. Adjusting his watch, he made his way toward the showroom, walking past rows of sedans and SUVs. His steps were unhurried, his posture relaxed. Inside, the cool air carried the faint scent of leather and freshly cleaned floors. A large digital display showcased the dealership's top models, while salespeople darted between desks, juggling phone calls and walk-in customers. The buzz of commerce was palpable, but so was something else, a subtle shift in energy as Taryn entered. A few employees glanced in his direction, their eyes flickering with curiosity, but no one approached him. That was when her voice cut through the room like a sharp blade. "Can I help you?" The tone was brisk, almost clipped, carrying an edge that wasn't welcoming. The voice belonged to Margaret, the dealership's manager. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and heels that clicked authoritatively against the tiled floor, she exuded confidence, the kind that bordered on intimidation. Margaret had built her reputation on efficiency and results, and she wasn't known for mincing words. Taryn turned to face her, offering a polite smile. "Just browsing, thank you." Margaret's eyes scanned him from head to toe, lingering a moment too long. Something in her gaze wasn't quite right, an evaluation, a judgment. She didn't smile back. "Browsing," she repeated, her voice flat. "Well, if you're looking for financing options, our team can guide you. But unless you're serious about buying today, we prefer to focus on active customers." The words hung in the air, cold and dismissive. Taryn's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Still, he remained calm. "I appreciate the information. I'd like to look around a bit more, if that's okay." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Just don't touch anything without asking first," she said curtly before turning on her heel and walking away. As Taryn moved through the showroom, examining vehicles and jotting down a few notes on his phone, the atmosphere remained tense. Employees whispered to each other, casting glances in his direction. It wasn't long before Margaret reappeared, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. This time, her arms were crossed, and her expression was one of thinly veiled irritation. "I noticed you've been wandering around for a while," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "If you're not planning to buy, I'll have to ask you to leave. We don't have time for distractions." Taryn looked up from the specs of an SUV he'd been reviewing. His calm demeanor remained intact, but his voice carried a quiet authority. "I'm not distracting anyone. I have every right to be here." Margaret scoffed. "Look, I've seen this before. People coming in, wasting time, pretending they're interested. We're running a business here. If you're not buying, you need to go." Taryn's gaze didn't waver. "I think you're making some assumptions about me," he said evenly. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her irritation now bordering on hostility. "And I think I know my job," she snapped. "Either show me you're serious, or I'll handle this my way." The tension in the room was thick, drawing the attention of nearby employees. They watched silently, unsure of what to do. The stage was set for a confrontation, but Taryn remained composed. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply met Margaret's sharp gaze with an unshakable calm that only deepened her frustration, and that was just the beginning. Margaret stood there, arms crossed, her gaze unrelenting. The faint hum of conversations in the showroom seemed to quiet, the air thick with tension. Taryn tilted his head slightly, letting out a small sigh before responding. "Handle it your way?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "What exactly does that mean?" Margaret straightened her blazer and gave a dismissive shake of her head. "It means I have to ensure my team and our customers feel comfortable. And right now, you're making people uncomfortable by wandering around without a clear purpose." Taryn raised an eyebrow. "Uncomfortable because I'm looking at cars in a car dealership?" The subtle challenge in his tone made her bristle. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a sharp whisper. "Look, I don't know what your deal is, but we've had enough people come in here wasting time, asking for test drives, then vanishing when it's time to talk numbers. So unless you're ready to buy, I suggest you leave." Taryn stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a small knowing smile that only seemed to irritate Margaret further. "I don't recall asking for a test drive. I'm just observing. Is that against your policy?" Her face flushed slightly, but she didn't back down. "You're disrupting my staff, and I won't allow that." From across the showroom, a young salesman hesitated, clearly overhearing the heated exchange. He looked as if he wanted to step in but thought better of it. Margaret noticed his hesitation and shot him a glare, silently daring him to intervene. Taryn remained composed, his voice measured. "I'd be happy to speak to someone higher up if you think I'm an issue." Margaret let out a dry laugh. "Higher up? I am the manager. There's no one else you need to speak to." Taryn took a step back, his hands sliding into his pockets. "Good to know," he said simply, her frustration boiled over. She turned to the nearest desk, picked up her phone, and began dialing. "If you won't leave on your own, I'll have someone escort you out." Taryn watched her calmly, his expression unchanging. "You're calling the police over someone looking at cars?" Margaret didn't respond, her focus on the phone as she gave a brief explanation to the dispatcher. Her voice carried a mixture of annoyance and authority. "Yes, there's a man here who's being uncooperative. He's refusing to leave the premises despite multiple requests." A few employees exchanged uneasy glances, their movements slowing as the weight of the situation sank in. One of them, a receptionist, whispered to a coworker. "Do you think she's overreacting?" The coworker shrugged uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with either Taryn or Margaret. Taryn stood quietly, his gaze steady on Margaret. When she hung up the phone, she turned back to him with a triumphant air, as if she'd just resolved a major issue. "The authorities will be here shortly. I suggest you wait outside." "Why would I wait outside?" Taryn asked, his tone still calm. "I haven't done anything wrong." Her voice rose slightly, enough to draw more attention. "You're trespassing. You've been asked to leave, and you're refusing. That's enough." At that moment, an elderly couple entered the showroom. Their cheerful chatter faltered as they sensed the tension. Margaret quickly plastered on a strained smile, gesturing for one of her salespeople to attend to them. The couple cast curious glances at Taryn as they were led to a nearby desk. Meanwhile, Taryn shifted his weight, pulling out his phone and scrolling through it nonchalantly. He looked utterly unbothered, which only seemed to inflame Margaret further. "You're not taking this seriously, are you?" she said, her voice low but sharp. He glanced up, his expression calm but with a hint of something harder to define, perhaps amusement, perhaps pity. "I take respect seriously," he said. "But you don't seem to. So here we are." Margaret opened her mouth to retort, but the sight of two uniformed police officers entering the showroom stopped her short. She straightened her posture and gestured toward them, relief and self-righteousness etched across her face. "This is the man," she said, pointing toward Taryn. "He's been asked to leave multiple times and refuses to cooperate." The officers exchanged a brief glance before approaching Taryn, their faces neutral. One of them spoke calmly. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. Can we speak with you for a moment? Of course, Taryn replied, his tone courteous. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and folded his hands in front of him. Happy to clarify anything. The stage was set for the confrontation to escalate, but Taryn's calm demeanor and Margaret's growing tension hinted that this wasn't going to play out as she expected. The two officers, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a steady gaze, approached Taryn. Their manner was professional but cautious. Reading the tension in the room, Margaret stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, looking triumphant. "Sir," the taller officer began, his tone even. "We were called because there's been a report of a disturbance. Can you tell us what's going on?" Taryn smiled politely, his calm unshaken. "Absolutely, officer. I walked into this dealership to look around. I've asked no one for a test drive, nor have I disrupted any business. I've simply been observing. Apparently, that's enough to warrant a call to you." Margaret interjected, her voice sharp. "You were asked to leave multiple times, and you refused. That's why we're here." The shorter officer glanced at her, raising a hand slightly as if to calm her down. "We'll handle this, ma'am." Taryn reached into his pocket slowly, making sure his movements were clear and deliberate. "I don't want any confusion here," he said, holding up a slim leather wallet. From it, he pulled a folded piece of paper. "This should clear everything up." The officers exchanged a glance as Taryn handed the paper to the taller one. Margaret's expression faltered slightly, her confident stance wobbling. The officer unfolded the document and began reading. His brows furrowed at first, then lifted in surprise. He handed it to his partner, who skimmed it before looking up at Taryn with wide eyes. "You're the..." the shorter officer began, trailing off. Taryn nodded. "Yes. I'm the new owner of South Point Motors. I finalized the acquisition last week. I decided to visit today unannounced to see how things run on a typical day." A wave of silence swept over the room. Employees who had been pretending not to listen stopped mid-motion. The elderly couple at the sales desk turned to watch the scene unfold. All eyes were now on Margaret, whose face had turned a deep shade of red. "Wait, what?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked from the officers to Taryn, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. This can't be right. "You, the owner?" Taryn didn't respond immediately. Instead, he kept his steady gaze on her, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The taller officer cleared his throat and stepped back, his tone now apologetic. "Sir, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. We'll step aside unless you need any further assistance." "No, officers," Taryn said calmly. "I appreciate your professionalism. Thank you for coming out." The officers nodded, one of them giving Margaret a brief but pointed look before walking back toward the entrance. As the doors closed behind them, the silence in the showroom felt deafening. Margaret looked like she was rooted to the spot, her mouth opening and closing as if she were searching for words that refused to come. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was shaky. I didn't know. No one told me we had a new owner." Taryn tilted his head slightly, his calm exterior giving way to a sharper edge. "And that justifies how you treated me? How quickly you assumed I didn't belong here." I thought..." Margaret began, but Taryn cut her off. "You thought what? That I couldn't possibly be serious about buying a car? That I was here to cause trouble? Tell me, Margaret, how many other customers have you treated like this because of what you thought?" Her face crumpled slightly, and she looked away, avoiding his gaze. The employees around the room stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Taryn let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again, his voice low but firm. "I came here today to see how this dealership operates. What I've seen so far is unacceptable. Not just your treatment of me, but the atmosphere you've created for your team and your customers." Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her confident facade had crumbled entirely, leaving only guilt and panic in its wake. The weight of Taryn's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Margaret's eyes darted around the showroom as if searching for an escape from the scrutiny. Her usual sharp demeanor had vanished, replaced by a flustered vulnerability. I didn't mean. She stammered, her voice faltering. I was just trying to do my job. You thought wrong, Taryn interrupted, his voice calm but cutting. You thought so wrong that you didn't even bother to stop and ask yourself if you might be making a mistake. And here we are. Margaret visibly recoiled at his words, but Taryn wasn't done. He turned to address the room, his voice carrying a commanding authority. To everyone here, let me make one thing clear. I'm not just the new owner. I'm someone who believes in treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or how they look. The employees exchanged uneasy glances, a mix of relief and discomfort crossing their faces. Margaret, however, seemed to shrink under the weight of his gaze. You, he continued, pointing at her, are the leader of this dealership, at least you were supposed to be. But instead of setting an example, you allowed your assumptions to guide your actions. Not only did you embarrass yourself, but you also tarnished the reputation of this business. Margaret's cheeks flushed a deeper red, and her lips trembled as she tried to form a response. I've worked here for over 10 years, she finally managed. I've always done what's best for the dealership. Is that what you think this was? Taryn asked sharply. Best for the dealership? Calling the police on a potential customer, or anyone, for that matter, without cause? Treating someone with disrespect because they didn't fit into the box you decided they belonged in? Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked much smaller than she had when she first confronted him. I'm sorry, she murmured, the words barely audible. Taryn regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Sorry isn't enough, he said finally. Not for this. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited to see what he would do next. Margaret's eyes widened in panic, the realization of what was coming dawning on her. Please, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I didn't know. If I had known, you didn't know because you didn't bother to find out, Taryn said coldly. That's the problem, Margaret. And it's a problem I can't overlook. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I've given everything to this dealership. Please. I made a mistake. Don't let this one moment erase everything I've done. Taryn's gaze softened just slightly, but his tone remained firm. This isn't about erasing what you've done. It's about accountability. Actions have consequences, and right now, those consequences are staring you in the face. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning could be heard. Margaret wiped at her eyes, but she didn't argue further. She knew there was no point. Taryn turned to the employees who had been watching silently. As of this moment, Margaret is no longer the manager of this dealership. I'll be personally overseeing operations until we find someone who embodies the values we want to uphold here. A few gasps echoed through the room, and Margaret's face crumpled. Please, she whispered one last time, but Taryn didn't respond. His decision was final that he turned back to her, his voice steady but not unkind. Take this as a lesson, Margaret. Assumptions can destroy more than just a moment. They can destroy trust, respect, and opportunity. Think about that as you move forward. With that, he gestured toward the door. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then nodded weakly and walked out, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The employees stood frozen, processing what had just happened. The showroom was still as Margaret's figure disappeared through the glass doors. Taryn stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding but not intimidating. The employees exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what would come next. Taryn took a deep breath, then turned to face them. His expression had softened, but the weight of the moment lingered in his tone. I know what just happened was uncomfortable to watch, he began, his voice steady but compassionate. And I know some of you are probably questioning what this means for your future here. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The tension in the room eased slightly as the employees listened intently. Let me reassure you, he continued. This isn't about tearing anyone down. It's about building something better, a place where every customer, every employee, feels respected and valued. That starts with accountability, and it starts today. The receptionist, a young man with glasses, hesitated before raising his hand slightly. Sir, if I may. I think some of us have seen things like this before but didn't feel like we could say anything. What should we do if we notice something like this happening again? Taryn nodded, his response thoughtful. Thank you for asking that. If you ever witness anything that goes against the values we're striving for, I want you to speak up, whether it's to me or whoever steps in as the new manager. Your voice matters. This isn't just my dealership. It's ours. And it's up to all of us to make it better. A ripple of relief passed through the room. Employees began nodding slightly, their posture relaxing. Taryn let a small smile tug at the corners of his mouth, sensing the shift. Now, he said, clapping his hands together lightly, let's get back to work. There are customers here who deserve the best experience we can give them. And moving forward, that's exactly what we're going to deliver. The employees dispersed slowly, some heading to customers, others retreating to their desks. The energy in the room felt different now, hopeful, as though a weight had been lifted. As Taryn turned to leave, the elderly couple who had been watching the scene approached him. The man, dressed in a tweed jacket, extended his hand. This isn't about tearing anyone down. It's about building something better, a place where every customer, every employee, feels respected and valued. That starts with accountability, and it starts today. The receptionist, a young man with glasses, hesitated before raising his hand slightly. Sir, if I may. I think some of us have seen things like this before but didn't feel like we could say anything. What should we do if we notice something like this happening again? Taryn nodded, his response thoughtful. Thank you for asking that. If you ever witness anything that goes against the values we're striving for, I want you to speak up, whether it's to me or whoever steps in as the new manager. Your voice matters. This isn't just my dealership. It's ours. And it's up to all of us to make it better. A ripple of relief passed through the room. Employees began nodding slightly, their posture relaxing. Taryn let a small smile tug at the corners of his mouth, sensing the shift. Now, he said, clapping his hands together lightly, let's get back to work. There are customers here who deserve the best experience we can give them. And moving forward, that's exactly what we're going to deliver. The employees dispersed slowly, some heading to customers, others retreating to their desks. The energy in the room felt different now, hopeful, as though a weight had been lifted. As Taryn turned to leave, the elderly couple who had been watching the scene approached him. The man, dressed in a tweed jacket, extended his hand. Young man, he said with a warm smile, I don't know who you are, but you handled that with grace. It's good to see someone stand up for what's right. Taryn shook his hand firmly, his smile genuine. Thank you. It means a lot to hear that. The couple walked away, and Taryn allowed himself a brief moment to reflect. He hadn't come to the dealership expecting such a confrontation, but perhaps it was exactly what was needed to set the tone for his ownership. This was his chance to create something meaningful, to leave a legacy built on respect, integrity, and fairness. Before stepping out, he turned back to the room one last time. His eyes swept across the staff, the cars, the customers. Change was never easy, but it was always worth it, and with that, he walked out, ready to build a future where assumptions no longer defined anyone's.